Hello, it's Ben Rubin from Patton, and I'm excited because I'm here with Justin Walker, and we're going to deal with a big topic today, and a slightly abstract topic, and something that people don't often think about too much. They use it on a daily basis. It makes the money go, makes the world go round, I should say. I've just ruined my introduction, but anyway, we'll carry on. It makes the world go round, and it's money, as I've just revealed to you accidentally. And we're going to talk about what it is actually and where it comes from and different ways of delivering money, running money in our society, and how it's evolved over time, issues with the current system. And different systems that could potentially work that have been used in our not too distant history in this country. And thank you, Justin, for taking the time.
Oh, thank you, Ben. Thank you. Well, as I said, I am not an economist. I should give a health warning out first of all. I am not an economist. I'm normal, and I like to be able to explain things in very simple terms because I'm basically a very simple individual. I think I've got a degree in common sense, but I certainly did not go through any university. Though I did do, my father paid for me to do a 3 month diploma at Cranfield University on international disaster management because I got caught up in sort of international search and rescue and various things I did for a bit in unpaid capacity. It was a volunteer basis. But I am not a gifted academic. But when people give me evidence and they give me ideas and stuff, I know where to go. That's how I. So I view this whole monetary thing. I came into this purely by accident, and because my uncle was a director of the Bank of England for 17 years, and as a result, I got to see behind the mask that is the Bank of England, the City of London, and those who seek to pull our politicians' strings from a hidden tier of governance that people aren't supposed to know about. So I came into this all by accident, um, and and my uncle actually went to the very first Bilderberg conference in 1954. He represented the FBI, not the Federation of Bureau Investigation, the Federal. I can't even say it. The Federal Bureau of Investigation, but the federal. Hang on, I can't even get it right myself now. We're having one of those evenings. The the Federation. That's it. The Federation of British Industries, which morphed itself into the Confederation of British Industries, and he represented the British industry for the very first Bilderberg at the Hotel Bilderberg in 1954. And the next year, he became director of the Bank of England from 1955 until 1972. And as I said, I didn't know too much about it all. But when I was 16 and going back to school on the train, I shared the train because he was traveling down as well. And we're having one of those first class British Rail breakfasts you get on the Pullman and enjoying a conversation, just a varied conversation. He was an uncle by marriage, married to my mother's sister, a lovely man, I have to say. And he just asked me what I was going to do for a career. And before I had a chance to reply, he said, I just want to give you two bits of advice to take through life. He said, first of all, never believe anything you read in the press because we control it. And never ever believe a politician when they can say you can do something. They can't do anything unless we say they can. Now, at the age of 16, going back to school to do my O levels and stuff, I didn't exactly say, who are you talking about, Uncle? But I did realize it was to do with banking and, because I knew he was a director of the Bank of England. And I knew he was involved. He was Pilkington's glass, Lord Pilkington. So, yeah, it was just one of those things. But yeah, rather
That's
than
that's 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 very good advice to receive at the age of 16.
exactly. Well, it really sums it all up, doesn't it? Because we know the politicians do bugger all. And certainly I stopped reading the newspapers a hell of a long time ago. So, and the irony is, I actually worked in a local newspaper for 12 years, a regional newspaper. Thoroughly enjoyed myself, but I was more on the advertising and the I was doing farming magazines and good dining guides in the Lake District and stuff. Great fun. foreign.
Okay. You were on the commercial side, were you? You were.
Well, yes, I was. I was. It was called advertorial. What I was involved in. In other words, there was an editorial content which I had to coordinate and get people to write, and then I got people to pay up because we are going to write nice things about them. So it wasn't like advertising; it was like an editorial. So they paid their money, and we wrote nice things about them. Very, very, yeah, shaded area, but it worked very well. Anyway, so
I'm sure it did. Well, your uncle sounds like quite an interesting chap. He's probably someone that we would be talking about on the UK column if he were alive today.
yes,
But
well, he died in 1983, but I mean, I just knew that, I mean, he was a globalist. He was a globalist.
yeah,
And it was interesting. One Christmas, I remember him talking to my father. Must have been around about 1973, something 72, something like that. I was about 18 years old or something, 74 it would be. Anyway, he was basically talking to my father about, because Pilkington's Glass is a big multinational company, and and he was basically saying, when you invest millions into a country, and of course millions then would probably be billions today, he said you've got to make sure the government doesn't suddenly nationalize you overnight and you lose all your investments. He said you've got to keep an eye on things for your shareholders. So you've got to be able to control the government to make sure the government doesn't do anything stupid. Now that was that was, if you like, his basically his reasoning for having a hidden tier of governance made up of corporate governance, pulling the strings to make sure people, behaved themselves and didn't get in the way of big business. That was his rationale, and of course, I suppose, in one sense, it makes perfect logic. But of course, we now know just how out of control this logic has become, and the World Economic Forum and the Davos crowd, the multi-billionaires, etc., etc. So we know now the bigger picture is heading us towards a technocracy, and artificial intelligence, everything else is out of control. But how can they all do this? Well, they do it because they can control the world's money. Those who control the world's money control the world stage. It really is as simple as that. But as I said, I had no intention of getting involved in any of this until I got a very strange phone call, which I will now tell you about because I think you'll be amused by it. In 2012, my uncle died in 1983, so a long time before. But in 2012, I got a phone call. And it just so happened that I'd written an article for the UK column. I had twigged on Abraham Lincoln and his greenback dollar, which he created during the American Civil War. And the dollar, the North, the Union was absolutely on their back foot. They were losing. They'd lost the first battle of Bull Run. Confederate forces were heading towards Washington, and to put it bluntly, the money had run out of the Treasury. And Abraham Lincoln said, "Well, what do we do?" And one of his friends popped up and said, "Well, look, why don't you just create money based on it was on the integrity of the government." And of course, I suppose you could argue today if you based any money on the integrity of the government, you wouldn't be able to buy a packed lunch. I mean, what does that mean? But what it was actually creating money based on the wealth of the Union of the North of America. And they were debt-free, interest-free notes, and they were called greenback dollars, green on one side, grey on the other. And they worked to treat. And of course, this is basically Abraham Lincoln had declared war on the City of London and the lenders, and they tried to get him to take some juicy war loans, and they were going to charge him something like 26% interest. And Abraham Lincoln realized that that was just putting his country into a debt noose. So he declined, and he went with these greenback dollars, debt-free, interest-free money. And so I noticed this because a very nice lady called Ellen Brown, who's still alive. She's a US attorney who writes about banking and how to defeat the bankers. And she wrote about the greenback dollar, and I read it, and I thought, well, why can't we have a greenback pound? So I wrote an article in the UK column when it was a newspaper saying, why don't we have a greenback pound? And anyway, I didn't think any more of it. But suddenly, this phone call in September 2012, and when the phone went, my wife was in the kitchen, my daughter was doing her homework, and I thought, oh God, it's going to be one of my wife's friends, which means I'm going to have to go in the kitchen and look after things. But when I picked up the phone, it said, oh, hello, is that Justin Walker? So I went, well, it might be. He said, well, let me put your mind at rest. Is that Justin Walker, the nephew of the late Lord Pilkington? And I said, yes, it is. Oh, he said, marvelous. He said, now look, you don't know who I am, and you won't be able to trace this phone call, but my father is not long for this world. And he read your article in the UK column, and he wants to give you a message. So at this stage, I was thinking, what on earth is going on? Now, it turned out that his father was a director of the Bank of England when my uncle was a director. And so I started to panic because my laptop was closed. There was no paper, no pen by the phone. So I said, well, okay. So he said, I want you to research the word Bradbury. He didn't say Bradbury Pound. He just said, I want you to research the word Bradbury. And I was panicking by this time because my laptop would take too long to think. I had nothing to write it down. So I breathed on the window and wrote Bradbury. He said, now look, if you research the Bradbury, you will find a solution to all of Britain's economic woes. I said, right. He said, now look, I'm not prepared to talk any longer. It's been lovely talking to you. Please do that. My father would appreciate it if you did that. And with that, he signed off. And so I was a bit taken aback. I dialed 1471. I tried to get the number to see who it was. Number withheld. So I sort of went, oh. And by that time, the laptop was open, and I fed in the word Bradbury. And I got Julia Bradbury, the lady who struts around walking over the place. I got Bradbury, who wrote the Martian Chronicles. And I thought, well, this is not doing much good. Until then, suddenly I came across a chap selling stamps and coins and notes. And I suddenly saw a Bradbury note. What's a Bradbury pound? Treasury note. Gosh. And then I came across a chap called Thomas Johnston, who was a Privy Councillor, an MP during the 1930s, who nobody had a bad word to say about. He was in Churchill's wartime government looking after Scotland, and he had a legacy because he was the father of the Scottish hydroelectric scheme in the Highlands. And he wrote in a book called The Financiers and the Nation all about treasury money, the Bradbury Pound, and how this stopped a collapse at the outbreak of World War One. I thought, I've never heard of this. And I thought, gosh, this is like the greenback dollar. I thought, this is incredible. And then I talked to Mike at the UK column and Brian. Nobody had ever heard of the Bradbury Pound. We thought, well, what's going on here? What is this part of history that we don't know about? And I said, the story of the Bradbury Pound is written by this chap, Thomas Johnston. And if anyone wants to, they just look up Financiers and the Nation, the Financiers and the Nation, and you'll get it online. You can actually read the book online. And I think it's chapter 6 or chapter 9? And it's called Usury and the Great War. And it absolutely explains how we were on the gold standard in those days. And literally, we only had, I know it sounds a lot of, well, we had 10 million or 9 million pounds worth of gold in the vaults at the Bank of England. But you've got to understand that I think £1 in 1914 is equivalent to about £140 today. It's quite a lot of money. But nonetheless, all the paper money, the paper notes coming from the Bank of England, I promised to pay the bearer on demand the sum of, because they are IOU notes. And in theory, you're supposed to be able to go to your bank or go to the Bank of England to exchange your note for gold. And of course, in those days, you didn't have £1 notes, you only had £5 notes. And of course, £5 in those days was a hell of a lot of money, at least, six, seven, £800 today. So you went clutching your £5 note and you wanted to get gold. Well, to put it bluntly, there wasn't enough gold because they doled out so many notes, far more notes practicing something called fractional reserve lending. And as a result, there was going to be a run on the banks at the outbreak of the First World War, literally within the first day of declaring war. So the Treasury, well, the Chancellor of the Exchequer was David Lloyd George then, before he became Prime Minister, passed a bill through Parliament, the Currency and Notes Act, in 2 days, which authorized the Treasury to create these things. And they are nicknamed Bradbury Pounds because Sir John Bradbury was the first Secretary to the Treasury, first Secretary to the Treasury, and he signed the notes. And these are Treasury notes, not Bank of England, and they are debt-free, interest-free, because they're based on the wealth and the labour potential, the creativity of the country. And it's a fiscal policy is known as M for money, M naught, and it's your money supply. And they actually do it today, and it's called the coins in your pocket. Your coins are created by the Treasury, not by the Bank of England. And those coins are debt-free and interest-free because they are based on the credit of the nation. So anyway, the upshot was the nation was saved from a run of the banks in 1914, and we got on with mobilizing. The war went ahead, but after a few months, the bankers, the private bankers, went running round to David Lloyd George and said, "Look, you've saved our bacon, but this is no way to run a war. You know, creating debt-free, interest-free money and not running up any national debt. You can't do that. You've got to get back to creating bonds and us buying bonds and 3.5% interest, going, I think it went up to 4.5%, which meant that at the end of the First World War, the national debt went up from 650 million to 7,500 million. And that's when the national debt suddenly soared. And there was no need to do that. They could have quite happily carried on creating these notes, £1 notes and 10 bob notes, and basically fighting the war based on the credit of the nation. Instead, they flipped completely. David Lloyd George went back to borrowing fresh air money from private businesses or private bankers who create money out of thin air as debt. And if it wasn't for the legislation passed by Parliament, that would be called fraud. Because if you and I tried it, we'd be out of prison. Gosh, I've talked a bit there, Ben. But that just
That was really interesting, and there are a bundle of things there that you brought up that I want to unpack actually.
yeah, good.
Um, so the first thing, to just get right the way back to basics, if I could just establish this with you and see if you agree with me in terms of my understanding of what money is essentially I view it as a technology. It's a fundamental technology that we use to run our society, and it's a technology that has three capabilities within it, right? So the first one is it's a medium of exchange, so we can exchange it with people. It has functionality in that we can go and buy things with it and use it to enable transactions with people in the marketplace. It's also a store of value, or it should be, if it's proper money, it should be a store of value long term, i.e., it shouldn't depreciate, and actually, ideally, it should increase in value over time. And then also, it's a unit of account. So we use it to keep track of performance inside companies or, whatever it might be. And it allows us to have a consistent way of understanding how things are running in the economic system and more broadly across society, right? And those are the things that it does. And historically, if you go back far enough, let's say 1,000 years, that would have been facilitated through precious metals generally, right? So you're talking gold coins, silver coins, and that is a good way of facilitating what money does, but it's also quite inconvenient in terms of transporting large amounts of gold around. It's very heavy. You know, if someone wants to to rob your stagecoach as you're going from place to place, it's easy for them to take it from you, that kind of thing. So rather than lugging big bags of coins around, they introduced paper money, which was essentially a proxy for the gold or the silver or whatever it might be. And this is the term that you've used, promissory note, right? So it basically says the money does exist, don't worry, the gold is there. You just need to go, I can't have it with me now, but I can give you this. And then when you choose to, you can go and get it from the bank, right? And essentially that's how paper money entered into the equation. That's what paper money was for a very long time, right? Does that all sound sensible
Yeah,
up
that
to this
sounds good. I
point?
mean, I was just simply told. I mean, I better explain very quickly. After I discovered, I discovered, I was told about the Bradbury Pound. Two gentlemen contacted me, and sadly, we're not with us now. A chap called David Pigcock and another guy called Ken Palmerton. And these two were money campaigners. They've been campaigning for the Bradbury Pound and for the government to use the credit of the nation to pay for what's needed. And they befriended me. They were lovely guys. David Pigcock had actually converted to Islam, so he was familiar with Islamic banking. And they were very good friends, and they took me under their wings. And they said the best definition of money that they used is that money is simply a convenient unit of exchange for goods and services that people have complete confidence in. And that just about sums it all up. But you're absolutely right in what you're saying.
Yeah.
Um, and to me, money should be a mix. You should have the ability to have electronic money. You should have the ability to have physical money. And we need a healthy mix in society so that no one can have any sort of monopoly over it, which they're obviously doing with the central bank digital currencies, which is what they've got planned at the moment.
Yes.
But
Exactly, and that's really interesting. And I'll come back to the point on Islamic finance because that's pretty. That I don't know a huge amount about that area,
well,
but
I don't. I just know instead of paying, you don't pay interest. You pay a one-off fee for the loan.
well, this is the thing, right? Which is the key point actually, because one of the things that you were talking about there was so we've established what money is. So it's a medium of exchange. And using my definition, a store of value in a unit of account, and you're in broad agreement with that. The way that money has been facilitated in our system for quite some time now, because the Bank of England was the first central bank, I believe.
Yes, the Glorious Revolution, which saw the arrival of William III and Queen Mary, William and Mary. And of course, that was all about, so we're led to believe, the Protestants kicking out a Catholic James II and effectively, restoring Protestant way of doing things to the country. Now, what people don't know is that with William and Mary came the bankers of Amsterdam. And the bankers of Amsterdam were part of what is termed the black nobility. And these were the Venetian bankers, and before that, Rome, going right back to Babylon. They go back thousands of years. And they'd already done a deal with Cromwell. And this is something that I hadn't realized until last year. That they insisted they would fund Cromwell and what he wanted to do with his Commonwealth and what have you, on condition that he brought about the execution of the king. They did not want Charles I anywhere near what they wanted to do because Charles I believed in the divine right of kings. Bankers believed in the divine right of bankers, the divine right of money. And this is what people don't realize. Now, with William and Mary, as I said, came the bankers of Amsterdam. And that is when the Royal Charter was given to the Bank of England in 1694, and exactly the same time the national debt was started. And by the way, I forgot to mention that Charles II had not exactly, he had reneged on his debts with the bankers. So effectively, the bankers wanted to come in, take over. And that's what they did on the coattails of William and Mary. So it's fascinating. When you actually look at the glorious revolution, it was glorious for the bankers. It certainly wasn't glorious for the people.
And that was the starting point of central banking.
That
So that
was
was
the
the
starting point. That was the first major central bank in the world. And of
yeah.
course, and I should just tell you this little quick story. Um, about 4 years ago, 5 years ago, so I don't get them now because I think these people have died off, sadly. But because of Ken Palmerton and David Pidcock, they knew people who were City of London people, quite high up, who were not happy with what was going on. Rather like the bank, the director of the Bank of England got his son to ring me to tell me about the Bradbury Pound. They were almost getting it off their chest before they died. It was sort of, oh well, we better confess. And I was rung up about 4 or 5 years ago by someone claiming to be the distant relative of Vincent Vickers. Now, Vincent Vickers is not a household name, but he was a director of the Bank of England during the First World War, and he actually witnessed how the Bradbury Pound saved the nation. Sovereign money by the Treasury saved the nation from collapse. After the First World War, he fell out with the new governor of the Bank of England, Montague Norman. Now, Montague Norman is the longest serving governor of the Bank of England. And it was Montague Norman who teamed up with Helmer Schlacht, who was Hitler's future finance minister. And in 1930, they started the Bank for International Settlements. Now, initially, the Bank for International Settlements was set up to oversee war reparations from Germany to the Allies. And Germany, having just had a hyperinflation period, was in economic chaos. So they set up the Bank for International Settlements to get German war reparations back on target. So the Allies were getting their money. Now, that was the cover story. The real reason for the setting up for the Bank for International Settlements in 1930 was for this bank to become the central bank for all the world's central banks. And that includes the Bank of England, the Federal Reserve, the European Central Bank, the Bank of Russia, the Bank of Japan, the Bank of China, the whole work. And at the moment, there are something like 63 member central banks for the Bank for International Settlements. Now, all these central banks have one thing in common. They create money out of thin air as debt. They do not create it based on anything tangible like silver, gold, or assets. So they are effectively creating money out of thin air. Now, the Bank for International
And creating money out of thin air and then letting us use it for a
yes,
for a
and
fee, for interest,
authority,
essentially.
it's usury based. Everything
Yes.
is usury based, and so now
Yeah.
what's so intriguing? Of course, running up national debts and all the rest of it. Now, what's intriguing is that the Bank for International Settlements, and I don't know how they got away with this, have given themselves diplomatic immunity. Like the United Nations, like a lot of these international organizations, it actually has diplomatic immunity. That means you can't go basically sneaking too far to find out what they're doing. You can be hauled away. You can't get in there to find out what's going on. All their meetings are secretive, and many of them do not take minutes. Now, they are overseeing over 97% of the world's money supply. Okay, now this is a very, very powerful organization, far more powerful than the World Economic Forum or anything like that. This is the blood supply, the oxygen supply for the entire global economy. It has to
Mm,
go through. And by the way, they also create all the rules of banking as well. This is a very powerful institution. Now,
indeed.
it's the thing that staggers me is that nobody knows about it. Since I discovered since I was told about the Bradbury Pound, I probably talked in person to about 20 MPs, something like 20, 25 MPs. And when I do, I always greet them with a hello, how are you? Very friendly. I said, you don't mind, can I just ask you a question? What can you tell me about the Bank for International Settlements? Not one of those MPs could tell me anything about the Bank for International Settlements. Not one of them.
That doesn't surprise me at all.
Yeah. So,
At
so
all.
you've got this shadowy organization that's overseeing the world's money, and none of our elected servants seem to know the first thing about it. Or if they do, perhaps they're a bit shady. They don't really want to stick their heads above the parapet. But this is a private, unelected, unaccountable organization that meets in secret. And that sums up the entire financial institutions, all the financial institutions in the world, the OECD, the IMF, all these, the World Bank, all these organizations are effectively private institutions that meet in secrecy, unelected people, unaccountable people. Now, and of course, that includes the money markets. And of course, the one thing about the Bradbury Pound and Treasury money or sovereign money, it's debt free, interest free, you've detached yourself from this system. So this money is rock stable. It's not going to be affected by the machinations of the unelected and unaccountable meeting in secret. So this is actually a real plus point for the Bradbury Pound if
Yeah.
introduced to pay for our services, all our key services, NHS, defence, police, everything, education, to pay for effectively the strategic industries that we depend upon, and to look after our infrastructure, energy infrastructure, roads, rail, whatever. And you use a small percentage of your nation's wealth, and we're worth around about 32 trillion pounds at the moment, according to the Office of what do they call it? Not the Budget Responsibility, the Office of National Statistics. Um, that's basically what we're worth. So you'd only need to put around about, I don't know, a couple of trillion into the economy, strategically placed, to make sure that everything is there. And you don't need to rely on direct taxation like you do. Indirect taxation you can, but direct taxation, which is highly invasive, highly complicated, and of course it keeps politicians in business, because most of the things that politicians discuss is how they're going to fleece us. So it's a complete transformation. If you have debt-free, interest-free money coming from the Treasury, it transforms the economy for the better.
So it's a very interesting idea. And the the thing that I think, to me it feels like a halfway house between real money and what we've currently got, which isn't real money. Because if we think about our definition, one of the most important things is this idea that money is a store of value. And I think one of the most important things about it is it's ideally backed by something, you know. So actually, you can go and exchange it for something else, right? Whether that's a precious metal or some other kind of asset, right? And we talked about the wealth of the nation. That's quite an abstract term, but you know, ultimately, it needs to be backed by some kind of value. And then also it needs to actually just functionally work in the marketplace. You need to know, because generally speaking, people don't want the money. They want what they can get with the money, you know. So actually you need to know that you can go into the marketplace and it will work if you want to go and buy something. If you want to participate in a transaction, you want someone to do something, right? In response to your presentation of your note, whether it's a Bradbury note, whatever we might want to call it in the future. So, but it is still fiat in a sense, right? Because it's still being created out of thin air. It's just being done in the Treasury rather than being done in
It's not
the
out of thin air.
bank,
It's not out
the
of thin
Bank of
air.
England. And well, is it not?
No, because you're back. You've got the. If you imagine, I mean, obviously the gold standard is gone now. You're not going to return back to the gold standard or any silver standard, because to put it bluntly, there's not enough gold in the world. And as soon as any country went back to the gold standard, the price of gold would just go out of. How would you get it? It's physics. It's a physical. It's so limited in what they've got, and who's got the gold? We haven't got much gold because Gordon Brown got rid of most of it. So I mean, the bottom line is you can never back it by gold ever again. No, this is something worth. So in other words, basically, it's like if you own your house, you've got that is worth whatever it's worth. And if you get a mortgage or you say, well, look, my house is that's solid. And you're given money based on it. So it is based on something tangible, but you can't go and exchange the note for it. But you just know that that note is worth that money, and it's not going to go up. It's not going to be devalued. It's not going to suffer from inflation. It's solid. And we want to take the opportunists. I mean, we don't really want people making money out of money. That's how we get in the mess we're in.
Yes, well, I certainly agree with that. So my view is that money needs to be backed by something, and I understand what you're saying in terms of it's backed by the assets of the nation, or the nation backs it because the nation will work to deliver against the value that's
It's
required in
obviously
order
will
for
do.
to prop up the currency. I think that the main benefit is that um it's not debt based, i.e. you're producing it and you're not getting someone else to produce it and then paying them
And,
an
and,
extortionate
and
amount of
I
money
want
to
to make
do
one
so.
very important point here, very important. And you would not have the decision making left into the hands of the politicians. Whilst we have an adversarial basically parliament where you have the left versus the right. And I mean, don't get me on that subject because I'm declaring war. I'm part of a big project that we're going to be launching in the next few weeks about getting people to walk away from the left right political spectrum, which is only there to divide and rule. We've got to get humanity uniting as human beings against the technocracy that's been rolled out, and they depend upon us being divided and worrying about whether we're on the left or the right and whatever. Get rid of that.
Hmm.
But basically, the shenanigans that go on in party politics, you don't want them anywhere near the levers of power, i.e., money making. That would be fatal. And we've got to take a leaf out of the. And I've talked to Will. I've talked to a few people on this, and we've got to sort of take a leaf out of the Saxons. And the king used to have a thing called the Witan. A Witan, Witan. A Witan was effectively wise advisors who the king selected to advise him on his best course of action. Now, that wouldn't work in that sense today. What you'd have to have is some sort of elected witan of wise people who have been thoroughly vetted for their humility, for their true values, humility, integrity, and the ability to think a problem through. And they are there to serve. They know that they're there to serve and not to be used or to be bribed or to be climbing their own greasy poles to get be made a lord or to go where in other words, to be detached from any temptations. And this such a thing could be done. And in a way, it's a bit like judiciary. I mean, I'm not very keen on the present judiciary, but in theory, the judiciary should be beyond temptation, beyond all the problems. So we need to have a sort of treasury witan who would be responsible for deciding how much money goes into the economy to ensure that our services, our infrastructure, and strategic industries are protected for the good of all. That in a nutshell is what it is. You wouldn't
Okay,
have
so
the
so that
politicians
that
anywhere
that's
near it.
that's 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 interesting because when you were saying it's going to be managed by the Treasury rather than the Bank of England, but then you also
Well, the
said
Bank of
and
England would be
you can't have politicians involved with it. And I'm thinking, okay, well, the Treasury is with the Chancellor, and Chancellor's a
yeah.
politician, but
Well, I think
actually,
it's got
but you're advocating a more substantial transformation of the
it's got
political
to
system.
change. The Treasury would immediately shut down the Bank of England and all its assets, everything would be absorbed straight into the Treasury. The Treasury itself has got to come under a Treasury Witan. The politicians should be knocking at the door asking for help. In other words, it's got to be a complete, we've got to change things completely. I mean, this is not just the Bradbury Pound. We've got to look at our entire political system. At the moment, it's riddled with corruption, it's riddled with vested interest and lobbying groups and God knows what else. And we know, in a nutshell, that the City of London took over again since the Glorious Revolution. And when you had Roman civil law, or the laws of the sea, if you liked, mixing with the law of the land, we've had a complete sea change about the way we govern ourselves. And on the surface, it appears it's more democratic and the more people are involved. We haven't got the divine right of kings. So it appears on the surface to be better. But in fact, it's serving a new type of king, and that is the City of London. And so we've got to get rid of the corporate oligarchs and restore things very much back to the people. But in so doing, we've got to ensure a system whereby everyone is there to serve and everyone is not there to make a name for themselves and to basically, well, yeah, we suffer from people who are career politicians, and we don't really want career politicians. We want a bit like jury service. People are there to serve. We all step up to the plate to do our bit and then walk away having done our bit. I mean, it's all got to be ironed out. I mean, I'm only giving some guidelines now that we're looking at. This has all got to be discussed properly.
Oh,
And
absolutely. Yes. I think the governance of the system that you were talking about is something that has to be debated at length, right? And the
oh gosh,
mechanics and the mechanics of it. But I think that what's most particularly interesting, and the reason why I was really interested to speak with you, is that there is actually an example in the in our not too distant history where we have taken another approach. Money was created in a different way. It was used functionally across society in England. And if it wasn't for the vested interests intervening and moving the system back in the direction that they wanted it, then we could have potentially seen a permanent change to the banking system, and that would have ultimately been a net positive for the rest of the country, not for the City of London, but certainly for the rest of the country.
well, do you know that since 1571, there's been a gentleman sitting with our elected members of parliament called the City Remembrancer.
I do know that, yes.
Yeah, yeah. Well, not many people do. Occasionally, it got in the Daily Mail about 12 years ago. Just occasionally, people say, "Oh, who is this?" And of course, they try and say, "Oh, he's more ceremonial, you know," and he's just,
Oh no,
"Oh no,
he's
he,
the he's the man, he's the power.
yeah,
He's the guy telling
there was
the
a
government what to do.
and the last 20 years, there's a gentleman called Paul Double who was
Indeed.
doing this, but he's no longer there now. It's another Paul, I can't remember what his second name is now, but
Yep.
anyway, he's just taken over. And yeah, I mean, it's not just about arranging booking events at banqueting house and all this. I mean, they try and make it sound as though it's all ceremonial because it started in the reign of Queen Elizabeth I, etc. No, this is the City of London making sure that their ancient privileges are held up and not interfered with. And of course, one of the things which made me chuckle was that Professor Richard Werner, who I think is currently at the University of, where is he? Where King Alfred the Great held court? Winchester. He's at University of Winchester. And Professor Richard Werner actually was on Russia Today announcing that the City of London is actually classed as a city, sorry, as a state within a state. In other words, it is actually a country. It is a
Yep.
sovereign state in itself.
Yep.
And that the monarch has to touch the sword when going in on a formal basis. The monarch has to seek permission to come in.
Indeed.
And yet the Bank of England, now, one of the things you don't know, I haven't said, is that at the moment, I wrote to the present Chancellor, Rachel in accounts. I wrote to Chancellor basically saying, excuse me, I've got 6 questions. I won't bore you with the questions now because I think, but one of those questions was, Could you please explain, is Professor Richard Werner correct in stating that the City of London is an independent state within a state? And if that's the case, because the Bank of England is actually residing in a foreign country, could you please advise how this works? And the other thing was that when the governor of the Bank of England goes to the Bank for International Settlements every 5 to 6 weeks for a key strategic meeting, which only involves around 12 actual governors and any invited guests. And of course, by the way, the Bank for International Settlements is very much the governors themselves don't run the show. It's the House of Rothschild and the key banking dynasties that run the show behind the scenes. So, I mean, there's something, I don't know, 10 banking families or something. I mean, the Warburgs, the Sheets. I mean, there are quite a few, the Rockefellers and everything else. But effectively, they are the hidden puppeteers controlling the Bank for International Settlements. So when the governor of the Bank of England goes off for his regular powwows in Basel in Switzerland, when he comes back, I just simply asked the Chancellor, does he come round to your door, knock on your door, and gives you a thorough briefing on what was said? Because after all, the relationship between the Treasury and the Bank of England is a rather skewed one. I mean, the Treasury has given the Bank of England a certain amount of independence, to decide interest rates and things like that. But surely, if the governor of the Bank of England goes to a private bank, central bank, the Bank for International Settlements, talks to private individuals in secret, and no minutes are taken at those meetings. So when he comes back, he's obviously got information about strategic positioning of money around the world and whatever decisions have been made. Well, excuse me, do you not tell our Chancellor what was said? So we don't know. And she can't answer. And at the moment, my MP, Tim Farron, is trying 3 times now. He's tried to get her to answer these questions. And they can't answer them because if they do, they give away the entire rotten system. The whole system is rotten to the core. It's got to be completely removed. You can't tinker with it. You've got all the schools of economic thought. You've got the Austrian school. You've got there's about 10 of them. And none of them accept that the entire system is unelected, unaccountable, in private hands, which meet in complete secrecy. So how can that be right? And not one of these schools of economic thought, and especially what do you call it? What's the bank? What's the university in London? Oh gosh, my mind's just gone blank. The university.
LSE.
LS, London School of Economics, set up by the Fabians.
Indeed, it was.
Yeah. So everywhere you look, the entire bloody system is rotten to the core. So the only way, you can't tinker with this system. It's too rotten. It's like a piece of wood that's completely gone. You replace it with a new piece of wood. And we've got to replace the entire system. It's going to be a huge challenge. It's not going to be someone like myself. I'm too thick and stupid to do it. We've got to get really good people. But we've got to accept that the system that we've got at the moment is run by criminals for criminals, and the criminals benefit. We, the people, do not benefit. So, and we'll see that next week when the Chancellor comes in with more ways of hitting the vulnerable in our society.
Well, quite. Yes. And I've got to say, I could not agree with you more. You can't tinker with it. You've got to replace it. And that is what we're here to do at Pattern, actually. So we're getting up and running. Money is a crucial part of this. We're going to have to continue to use the existing centralized debt-based system for the short term, certainly, and probably explore other alternatives, cryptocurrencies and digital currencies, like whatever,
Just be careful.
whatever we can. But I'm not a proponent of those.
No,
I think
well, I'll
that's
just say very quickly, I'm not an expert, and I'd be the first one to admit, my God, I know absolutely bugger all about them. But I was told by the people who I do trust that ultimately the technology is controlled by the central bankers.
absolutely no doubt in my mind.
So I
about
leave it
that.
at that. I don't even involve myself. If individuals want to tamper with it for themselves, that's fine. But for
Yeah.
nations to pay for their services, infrastructure, and strategic industries, you don't.
No, I agree. I agree. So anyway, this is a fascinating area. It's been great to talk to you, Justin. And
I've thoroughly enjoyed it, Ben. I do wobble on a bit, but yeah, I mean, as I said, I'm only a messenger, and I only came into this by accident. So I've got other interests where I'm sort of, but this has been thrust upon me, and sadly, because Ken and David are not with us any longer, I do feel as though I've been handed the baton, the Bradbury baton. So I've got to continue with it until somebody else takes it off me. Um, and I think people will, because the time is right now, because people just know the system's. Somebody's got to replace it. And when we had this shining moment in 1914 when it worked, um, why can't we revisit? And we're already using it with the change in our pockets. People don't understand this. The loose change in our pockets is done by using the same principle they did for the Bradbury Pound. I mean, put this way, on a £2 coin, you don't have the words "I promise to pay the bearers on demand the sum of."
and there you have it. It's already in place.
It's in
So
place. So
yeah.
and in fact, just as a one, we are expecting some sort of financial collapse to take place to create the chaos needed to introduce the CBDCs, the central bank digital currencies, which combine with a social credit system, which will give you the conditions you see in China today. And China is not a democracy. Okay, China is now increasingly a technocracy. For those people who live in the big cities, it's a technocracy. For those living in rural areas, not so much. But for the technocracy in the cities, and that's what's coming for us. And we've really got to be on our guard and say no, this is not going to be allowed. And but they are going to try and introduce a collapse. There is going to be some sort of collapse to bring things in, and in literally one sentence, all the government has to say is, from now on, the wealth of the nation, the credit of a nation, will underpin the lawful part of the British economy. And that's the key, the lawful part. And that is basically people's, shares and pensions and how you run businesses and everything else on a normal, lawful way. But when it comes to things like derivative debt bubbles and when they're gambling, I mean, do you know that there's a derivative debt bubble hovering over the entire world? And I think it's now 1.2 quadrillion dollars. I mean, just work that out. It's nonsense. And
It
it
is
and
nonsense.
this
Yeah.
and this is just been arrived at by people taking bets. I mean, again, don't please ask me to explain it. In fact, I can safely say I've not found anyone who can explain it.
Well, yes. I actually know people who trade in those markets, and they will tell you that it's nonsense, right? While earning millions a year. So, anyway, as you say, you can't tinker with it. You've got to replace it. Or actually, you're not going to replace that. You're going to get rid of that, and we're going to have something much more sensible and common sense.
Yeah.
Okay, but that's fantastic, Justin. Thank you so much for your time.
Oh, thank you, Ben. I
And
thoroughly enjoyed it.
yeah, it's been a great discussion. And for those listening in, I hope you've got something valuable out of that. We're going to be talking about money and the financial system quite a bit more this year. It's an important area for us. And if you're not already following along at pattern18.substack.com, then come find us there and join us in this process of decentralization and building a new distributed future. So for now, Justin, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Ben. Thank you.
And we'll see you all soon. Take care.